Sorry, my computer conked out for a minute. We're on the corporate income tax. Terrible tax, right? So we spend all this time uh, messing around with it when it raises very little money. There's just too many planning opportunities. There's too many politicians from both parties across the country who say, "Yeah, what we really want is companies to come here and invest, and we don't want to tax them too much." And that is always going to be the case. I could talk about this for days. Uh, but it really it raises no money. And here's something you should know. Here's a little tidbit of information for you. If you think so, I want to ask, if you ask yourself, well, why do we tax corporate income? It's not for the money because it raises very little money, right? Vermont, that sends a socialist to the U.S. Senate, raises more money from licensing barbers and hairdressers. Uh, so then you might say, well, maybe it's a user fee, right? Corporations exist by the grace of the law, by the grace of the people. That's true. And maybe, and those corporations as entities are using roads and police and courts. Um, and that's a very good argument. It's actually one of the better arguments for the corporate income tax, except the way we impose the tax, and this is going to be too much in the weeds, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but call me if you want to know more or email me. The way we impose the corporate income tax, the more you invest in a state and the more people you employ in the state, the less your tax burden is. That may make sense from an economic development perspective. It is not a user fee or a benefits tax. That's all I'm going to say about that. But then again, you might say the reason we tax corporate income is because we're trying to stick it to the man. We're trying to get those fat cat shareholders. Uh, Warren Buffett and the Goldman Sachs guys and Anthony Scaramucci. Geez, what happened to him? Anyway, that sounds nice. Two problems with it. One, most people are shareholders. I'm a shareholder. Many of you, if you're working, are shareholders. If you have any kind of 401k or any kind of pension plan, you're a shareholder. Where you think they invest the money? So you're shareholders. Now, you're not a big shareholder like Warren Buffett, but you're a shareholder. Second problem with that is lots of research. Lots of research. Minnesota Department of Revenue, about as liberal as they come, does research on this every year. They do an incidence study. And they find that the burden of the tax, the real incidence of the corporate income tax, falls on workers in the form of lower wages and customers in the form of higher prices. So maybe we're sticking it to the little man. Terrible tax. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about this terrible tax because it's a terrible tax. The other way we raise revenue, the other big way we raise revenue, of course, is through the sales tax. And here's a little thing you're going to learn now. And remember, only 5 states don't impose a sales tax. What are they? Remember it by NOMAD. NOMAD, the word. I'm sorry. New Hampshire, Oregon, Montana, Alaska, and Delaware. NOMAD. Those are the 5 states that don't impose. I'm a little punch drunk right now. Those are the 5 states that don't impose a sales tax. These states make up less than like 2% of the U.S. population, so the vast majority of us have lived under a sales tax regime most of our life. I'll just tell you a couple of things. One, how much money does it raise? It raises a boatload of money. It raises about $450 billion a year. It's a lot. So then, what happens after that? Why is it a good tax? What is good and bad about it? Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of great things about it. It is easier to administer, right? It's a point of sale, right? So it's an ad valorem tax. Let me back up. It's an ad valorem tax, so it's imposed on the value of the thing sold. So as prices go up with inflation, you get more money without having to raise rates. That's a good thing. It is collected by the vendor, right? So if you go to a store and you buy something, the store collects the tax and remits it to the state, and they have to remit it to the state or they go to jail and get fined and things like that. So they all do. The collection rate is like 98%. It's super high. So it's a very good tax, right? If you need money and you want money, this is the way to raise money. The other good thing about it is you have no work involved in it, right? The store collects the tax and sends it in. You pay, and then you move on. The rates are usually pretty low. And while all taxes affect buying habits, affect economic decisions, that's just a fact. The sales tax doesn't affect it as much as income taxes, honestly. So Delaware doesn't have a sales tax, but none of you are going to drive to Delaware to buy something to save the sales tax. Now, if you live on the border, that's a different issue. There's definitely border issues. Overall, it's a very good tax. It's super efficient, super effective. There's one big problem with the tax. It is a very big problem, and that is it's regressive. The poorer you are, the greater percentage of your income you pay in the tax. That is a bad thing. I don't know anybody who thinks regressive taxes are good, normative good. And that is a big drawback for the sales tax. Part of the problem is the way we impose the tax. So theoretically, the sales tax should fall on all final consumption, right? You tax everything at a low rate. But most of what we buy is not subject to sales tax, right? So real estate's not, intangible property's not, most services are not. We can talk about that someday in another class. Fascinating. Most services are not. We exempt a lot of necessities, food, medicine. So most of what we buy is not, including what a lot of rich people buy, like real estate and intangibles and professional services. If you tax all of that, the tax would be more proportional than regressive, and a lot of people think proportional taxes are not so fair either, but that's a discussion for another day, and I'd happily discuss that with any of you. Okay, I'm going to go through this because now I have two tapes going. The third way we raise money is through excise taxes. I am not a fan of excise taxes in general. Excise taxes, Adam Smith called them the work of the devil. It might be a little dramatic. Excise taxes have one sound rationale. They should be used, right? So what do we impose excise taxes on? Cigarettes, tobacco in general, alcohol, liquor in general, gasoline, good tax, and marijuana now. And the how much money did we raise from them last year? I'll tell you, maybe if I can find it. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah, we raised about $120 billion, $130 billion from excise taxes, all in. The largest being the gasoline tax, but forget the gasoline tax for a minute. We'll talk about that separately. The rest of the excise taxes, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, there's only one rationale for them, and that is to pay for externalities. The cost of using a product incurred by society that is not borne by the marketplace. So you smoke, you get sick, the public pays for it. There's a public cost that is not incurred, that is not paid for, compensated for when I buy cigarettes at the 7-Eleven. So having an excise tax on that is appropriate. The problem is we don't use excise taxes to pay for externalities. We use excise taxes for almost everything else because we don't like something. We don't like smoking, so we want to tax it to get you to stop smoking. It has nothing to do with the externalities. Certainly not the financial externalities. It's more like we don't like you to smoke, so we're going to lord over you and tell you what to do. Same thing with alcohol. We tried that for many years. interestingly, externalities are probably lower than cigarette tax revenue. Externalities are probably higher than alcohol tax revenue. Either way, though, they should be tied to the externalities. We don't even talk about the marijuana stuff now. That's ridiculous tax. But people try to put extra excise tax on stuff they don't like, right? So we tax guns, or violent video games, or fatty foods, or soda, and so on and so forth. And it's nauseating, in my opinion. But I'm an opinionated guy, as you know. The other thing that's a big chunk of the gasoline taxes. Why I like them. Actually, let me just mention this for a second. Gasoline tax is an excise tax, but it's actually a good tax because the gasoline tax acts like a user fee. And economists will tell you user fees are very efficient and effective ways of raising revenue. And this is why. You drive, you buy gas, you tear up the roads. We use the money from the tax you pay when you buy gas to fix the roads. And we keep repeating that. So it's tied directly to your road usage. That's a good thing. Little problem we have now, a little challenge is, what is it? I'd ask you, but you're not really listening to me. Well, you're not really talking to me. The challenge is this. Cars have better gas mileage. And whether it's electric cars or hybrids or just better fuel efficiency. So we're using less gas. That means we're collecting less gas tax. And that's a problem because we still are tearing up the roads. We're not driving less. And so there's a couple of alternatives to that. You can have mileage fees and toll roads and mileage taxes and toll roads. And those are good ideas. They're just difficult to implement. That's a discussion for another day, though, because I can talk about that all day, and I have. User fees in general, though, are terrific ways to raise revenue, and most of public finance experts will tell you they're very good because you could tailor the supply and demand, supply of government public services with people are willing to pay for it, and you can mesh that all up. The single biggest user fee is, trivia question for you, college tuition, state college tuition. So if you went to, Idaho State University, I don't know if any of you went to Idaho State University, that's a public school, and they are providing a public service for a user fee called tuition. And that's terrific. Two drawbacks on user fees. One, they're really tied to the service you're providing, so it's not a good general fund revenue source. And maybe it's three things. The other problem with it is the only way you can increase the user fee. Well, this is related to the first. The only way you can increase the revenue is by raising the user fee or having more people use it. And if you think about it, that doesn't really make sense. But the other problem, and the second problem is that you have to be able to limit access, right? So you can do that with toll roads, and you can do that with college tuition because you know who you're letting in and who you're not letting in. Harder to do with things like national defense or police protection or fire protection. And then the other problem with user fees, as good as they are, is you have some market limitations. So if you take a really good school, a really good public school, like, say, UVA, and you really jacked up the tuition, the user fee, people might say, wow, I got into Duke too. I think I'm going to go there because it's the same price, right? So, and you'd see that a lot in different areas. Okay. The last thing we're going to talk about for a minute is intergovernmental aid. Intergovernmental aid to the states is about $700 billion. This is pre-COVID-19. It's going to jack up tremendously this year. Intergovernmental aid to the states now for healthcare related stuff, but it's usually for Medicaid And we talked about this a little bit last week. It's usually for Medicaid. It is usually for transportation, a little bit less for education. I'm not. I'm agnostic on intergovernmental aid. I think there's a lot of good things about it. If you're looking for a national leveling of funding for certain services, I think that's one way of doing it. If you want to, and I think Medicaid, for instance, it has to be a federal funded program. There's usually a lot of strings attached. I'm not a big fan of strings attached on state authority. And it often provides, if you're gonna have like block grants and stuff where there's no strings attached, it creates a fiscal illusion, right? People get more government than they're willing to pay for. So there's lots of weird little issues with intergovernmental aid. Raises a lot. It's going to raise a lot more, and this is not an issue that's going to go away. All right, you know what? We're going to stop here because I've now gone over my limit. I'm going to be back next year. I'm going to start next year, maybe next week, talking about a little tax policy, little sound revenue policy principles, which I probably should have talked about today. So I'm going to do it on the back end just to maybe, if anybody's interested. And then we're going to talk about economic development policy, which is related to everything we're talking about here, but much more interesting. All right. Goodbye.